Good morning, afternoon, or night to at Sushi Goat. It is really great to finally put a voice to the name. So, at Sushi Goat on Twitter, sent out an audio boo describing why he doesn't find agreement in the natural rights theory, but that he is a subscriber to the non aggression principle, or as it is alternatively known, the principle of non initiation of aggression. In my understanding, uh, natural rights theory and the non aggression principle are not just compatible, they are really almost materially equivalent. Uh, on the topic of natural rights, I think that many times people get hung up on the terminology. They hear this natural rights thing and they think, what the heck does natural rights even mean? What is all this nonsense about? What is natural about rights? And how would nature give someone rights? How does that even make sense? Well, just to clear things up, natural rights doesn't say that this thing called nature gives you rights, as that would be a mere linguistic substitution for a metaphysical entity that would give you rights. Well, I think if the name hangs people up, um, I think perhaps a better name might have been substituting the word rational for natural, giving us a rational rights theory. It is a natural rights theory in that it begins with a starting point of analysis of a single individual in a state of nature. The idea being that you shouldn't begin an ethical analysis with the clouded presuppositions of an individual in a civil society, like Aristotle did, but that a proper starting point for ethical analysis is the individual in nature alone from all other persons. By herself, and then through rational discursive reasoning, eventually we arrive at an ethical analysis that begins to include other persons. The idea is not that this thing called nature gives you rights, because no one gives you rights like something that's given to you, you possess, and you put them in your pocket. You possess rights as a rational thinking entity. It's, in a way, it's part of your nature to have these rights because by nature you're a rational entity. If you are watching this YouTube video and you're thinking the ideas that are coming through, well, you're a rational entity. The chair you're sitting on has no idea what I'm talking about right now, so, you know, there goes that. An individual entity, rational entity, makes rational choices based on ideas. It chooses means to accomplish its preferred end states, and that because the individual makes choices, there is the element of ethics involved in those choices, um, especially when you begin to add in other rational persons. In a state of nature, it really wouldn't matter what a single individual cut off from all others may do. They really may do as they wish and employ any means to accomplish any ends that they might choose. Um, for some people, they might argue that morality might come into play somewhere in here, but I would argue at least that ethics would not, and we'll just push the moral morality part aside for now. Really, what we're looking at is ethics and irrational ethics. Well, only when we analyze the single individual as in the proximity of a second individual does the realm of ethics really begin to emerge. Now there are two people in proximity. That just means that they have some kind of contact with each other, and they must both contend with the conditions of nature to acquire and use the scarce resources of nature available, and to use those resources as ends to accomplish their preferred end states, their subjective preferences. These two people we have in nature, they might cooperate, and through division of labor, one is marginally better at the other at certain tasks, and the same with the other. They might be able to produce more than they might be able to individually, and this is kind of the economic rationale on why people come together into societies at all. They come into societies for the purpose of a greater satisfaction of their subjective preferences or a greater satisfaction of their desires by the greater production that is enabled by the division of labor, or and trade and such like that. So our two persons, for whatever reasons, um, they may prefer not to cooperate, in which case they prefer the benefits of being without the greater production given to them by dividing up the labor into what each individual is better at, for maybe the sublime pleasures of solitude or independence or whatever. Maybe one guy's a jerk or something. Pardon me. But for one of the two to initiate aggression against the other is in its action a principle which denies the other person's rational nature. To initiate aggression against another individual is to treat that other individual as merely a means to accomplish your own preferred end state. But the fact that the aggressor has rationally preferred end states themselves and wishes by action to accomplish them is the adoption of the principle that they themselves are not, merely a means, but that their satisfactions are ends into themselves. The aggressor, by acting to satisfy their desires, acknowledges the principle that they themselves are ultimate ends. But they do not extend in that initiation of aggression. The aggressor does not extend the same principle universally to the other individual. They are engaged in a kind of rational non-resonance or rational contradiction. They accept and deny the same principle simultaneously, which is why I think that perhaps it would have been better if Enlightenment philosophers had referred to natural rights theory as a rational rights theory. But we're left with what we got. It's history. So, in Sushi Goat's audio boo, he said that at one time he was trying to, quote, find an axiom that made property rights a moral absolute, close quote. Well, I'm a second-rate philosopher on my best days, but I've been trying to develop a simplistic argument for the natural rights theory by distilling the essential premises of the theory. I would agree with you that the non-aggression principle and the natural rights theory is not so patently clear that all people should rationally accept them on their face. These theories or philosophical arguments, as all arguments are ultimately relying on fundamental and irreducible premises. So, in a similar way to the mathematically uninitiated, Pythagoras' theory or theorem is not necessarily patently obvious at first glance, right? If you're not mathematically initiated, then someone gives you Pythagorean's theorem, and you're like, well, why would that work? You could just accept it on authority, but it doesn't. Your mind doesn't naturally leap to say, you're looking at a triangle with a right angle on one. You don't. Your mind doesn't say, oh, well, if I square the hypotenuse with the two sides, the sum of the two sides, well, they should be equal. Well, so after the Pythagoras' theorem is explained and tried a few times, most people are fairly willing to accept that this is the universality of this proposition, that every triangle with a right angle is going to have this formula work for it. And in a similar way, I think that a natural rights theory or a rational justification of the NAP or the NAP does at least require three premises. And these are kind of ones I've concocted on my own, and perhaps we can refine these as we go. But I think these are the three premises that make the most sense for justification of NAP or natural rights. The first premise is that individuals make meaningful choices. That means that they have the ability to choose A or B, and they're not solely materially determined. So if we get into a material determinism and people don't have free will and can't really make their own choices, well, then we can throw out ethics altogether, because it doesn't make sense to yell at a tree for doing something other than it does. It just does what it does. It doesn't make choices. The second premise is that all persons have equally relevant ethical standing to make ethical claims. And I know this is fairly convoluted. This is the one I want to really clean up and make a little bit clearer, but essentially it means that all people have equal ethical standing to make ethical claims, that there are no superior or inferior persons. The moment you have one person who is somehow ethically superior, such that the inferior's ethical claims are not relevant, then you have masters and slaves. And I think you just have to reject that premise from the get-go in order to arrive at a NAP or a natural rights theory. Someone who says that there can be masters and slaves, well, they're never going to buy the NAP or natural rights theory. And the third and last premise is that the concept of personal private property is a meaningful and legitimate ethical claim. That, people need to eat in order to live, and eating seems to be a acquisition of property or resources to the exclusion of all others, and if property is a meaningless concept, or is not a legitimate concept, if property doesn't work in an ethical theory, well then you can't eat, and it'd be kind of a silly ethical theory to say that that a rational being or entity, what it requires for subsistence is ethically denied to it. So that would be a very odd, not to say that it can't, you can make some arguments, but also there is also the possibility of dividing property up into like possessions and property or whatever, like, proudhood or syndicalists and, these kinds of things. But I'm not going to get into them. Let's just, so those are the three premises. Well, it seems to me that it really is the second premise that of natural rights theory, as I conceive it, that seems to be of most concern to our friend Sushi Goat. And as he would say, quote, "There is no such thing as an absolute moral fact," close quote. So, while I think it is awkward to say that Bob has a natural right to his property, perhaps it would be more satisfactory to say Bob has a rational right to his property. Which is to say that under the conditions in which Bob has acquired his property, if they were ethically legitimate conditions, then Bob therefore has a right to defend his property. If John wishes to acquire Bob's property by stealing that property, then John's actions, if John would like to claim that he is the rightful owner of the property that he's stealing after he steals it, and thus defend it against other illegitimate acquisitions, is fundamentally contradictory in the principles in operation in John's mind. One principle is that of property rights, and a second principle is that John can somehow legitimize his action. And this is generally, psychologically going to happen through some special circumstance, special extenuating circumstance, such as, well, Bob has so much and I have so little, and that I should have some of what Bob has. And this becomes the psychological, rationale to justify the unethical act, to try to clear up the contradiction that immediately arises in one's mind. So Bob's basic position is that his justly acquired property is his, and this is, as Sushi Goat would say, an ethical preference or a moral attitude. And I would agree, this is absolutely the case. And yet, at the same time, there are ideas at work, and these ideas are more than just subjective preferences. So I would definitely as I'll get into, I'm definitely saying that ethics is objective in the world, but it's more than just subjective preferences. It's really conceptual, about concepts and ideas and philosophy. So, in the same way that there are no moral absolutes, this would be the case with nearly every empirical theory. We must, kind of acknowledge here. Gravity is not an absolute. The speed of light is not an absolute. Um, if we are entirely confident that these might remain constant, it is only because our past experience has shown little to no derivation, and therefore we consider it as if it was absolute. But of course, tomorrow all atomic forces might stop and the universe could dematerialize. And, there's nothing that really proves that the past will continue on in the way we've observed it. So we don't really have even scientific absolutes. So in the same way, there's no moral absolutes. I mean, just because there are no moral absolutes doesn't mean that we can't arrive at a rational morality. Just because there are no, biological absolutes doesn't mean we can't arrive at a rational biology. The statement you made, quote, if they are consistent in their moral attitude, then they would accept the NAP or NAP, close quote. And this is a statement that I think recognizes the implicit rationality of individuals and that logic and reality are rather persistently consistent, and that a person's reason should seek a coherent and consistent ethical stance. The NAP and natural rights theory is, I believe, the only coherent and ethical stance available. And I'm not going to get into my refutations of ethical nihilism or ethical and cultural subjectivism or intuitionism or utilitarianism in the here and now, but I do believe that the NAP and the natural rights to be very closely related philosophically. I would agree with Sushi Goat that an adherence to the NAP and natural rights theory is generally embedded in our attitude through social biological evolution, um, and of course, I think that's true, and that's because violations of the NAP are always going to be less productive and satisfy less of the subjective preferences of individuals. So, I can go along with that about, social biological evolution and why they generally adhere to the non-aggression principle. And also in his audio boo, Sushi Goat said, there is no such thing as an absolute fact, and I think I quoted that earlier actually, but while on the face of the matter, this is a statement regarding the factual basis of morality, if you really think about it, there really is no factual basis for any ideas. Facts are about what we experience and how we experience it, the phenomenological, if you will, if we take the German philosopher's word. Um, what Sushi Goat means is morality. If what Sushi Goat means is morality is not in the objective world and is only in the mind of the individual, I can find a lot of agreement with him on that. Morality and ethics only exist in the minds of rational individuals. These are ideas. Ethics is not in the world as we experience it, and for that matter, mathematics and logic is not in the world either. But that doesn't mean we throw these ideas out. These are good, useful ideas that help us make sense of the world. These are, conceptual categorizations that help us, frame our experience in some organized and coherent fashion. And alternatively, if what Sushi Goat meant was there is no incontrovertible ethical contention, close quote, well, he didn't say that, I'm kind of paraphrasing it, and maybe perhaps a clearer meaning, then I would find a lot of agreement with this statement as well. People have lots of different ideas, and there are few, if any, ideas which are agreed upon unanimously. So, yeah, I mean, sure. Um, and this is a thought I've been kicking around, and maybe, Sushi Go, you can help me out here, or any other YouTube listener or whatever. I've been kicking around this idea, lay it on you guys to see what you think about it. When natural rights theory is accepted by an individual, it becomes an ethical fact or something in the world when that person defends his person or property from illegitimately initiated aggression. And of course, this could be said for any idea, but I've been kicking around that one for a while, and I think there might be some insight or argument to be gleaned from that idea somewhere, but I can't quite lay my finger on it, so I could use other people's help to cogitate that little problem out. So, in any case, to Sushi Goat, thank you so much for your audio boo. It was good to hear from you. Thanks so much for furthering the ideas of liberty, and have a good evening. Tune sede malice sed contra audientur tu.